go. Alrighty. Hi, everyone joining us. We're going to wait another minute or so before we get started to let some people have some time to enter, and then we'll get into our webinar today. Hi, everyone joining us. We're just going to wait another minute or so to let people have some time to enter and join our webinar. Alrighty, well, thank you everyone who's been able to join us today for our webinar titled OSA, which stands for the Office of Student Accommodations. We're here with the Office of Student Accessibility to talk about accommodations and more that you might need to know on campus. I'm joined here with Amy Milne and Stephanie Mandel from OSA. They're going to walk you through some really important information for you this afternoon. Right off the bat, I just want to let everyone on this webinar know that we will be recording and uploading this webinar for later viewing. So if you can't attend the whole entire webinar or want to reference it later, it will be available in a few days on the orientation website. I also want to mention that we will have some time at the end of today's session to answer any questions. You're welcome to drop them in the Q&A chat, but we'll be waiting till the end to dive into those Q&A questions. And just so everyone's aware, if you're asking a more personal or student-specific question, we might direct you to email some of those to the office to make sure you're getting an answer that suits your needs. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to the Office of Student Accessibility to take us away for today's webinar.
Great, thanks, Fran. Stephanie, do you want to throw up our... Fantastic, thank you. So as Fran said, my name is Amy Milne, and I am the director of the Office of Student Accessibility here on campus, and I'm joined by my colleague, Stephanie Mandel. I'm going to do some introductions. I'm going to let Stephanie introduce herself after I introduce more broadly our team. So our team is comprised of 5 professional staff, as well as, depending on the term, we'll have a few GAs, graduate students, as well as possibly some undergraduate students and law students working in different capacities in the office. But I will tell you, between the 5 professional staff, we have combined over 65 years of being a part of the Lewis and Clark community, whether that is through us, some of us are alumni, some of us have worked here for quite a few years, but we're deeply committed to the Lewis and Clark community, and I'm very proud of our team, very proud. So along with Stephanie as associate director, we also have another associate director, and that's Rebecca Brooks. Rebecca does not work in the summer, so that's why she's not on the webinar with us today. But Rebecca will work with students, meeting one-on-one, doing the interactive process, determining appropriate accommodations, as well as oftentimes Rebecca is a fantastic person to problem solve or navigate accessible educational materials if those are part of your accommodation portfolio. In addition, Carolyn Thompson is our administrative specialist. Carolyn is really a lot of the logistical implementation of our accommodations, as well as if students have exam accommodations with our office, you'll get to know Carolyn really well. She runs our testing center. I feel Carolyn is the hub of our office in terms of coordinating and keeping us all on track. The other arm of our office is around case management, and we are thrilled that Gabby Herman will be rejoining our team. Gabby's been on maternity leave. She will come back in mid-August. And Gabby is a social worker who works with students, not just students with disabilities, but also students who are finding that they are needing to access a resource or referral, both on campus, off campus. And then let Stephanie introduce herself.
Yes, hi, I'm Stephanie Timey Mandel, and as Amy said, I am one of the associate directors at OSA, also an alum of Lewis and Clark, both the undergrad and the graduate school, so couldn't stay away. Let's see. So before we dive into kind of the meat of our presentation today, I just want to give a quick note about the language that we use in this presentation to describe people. So our intention is always to honor the preferences of people with disabilities, and different people prefer to use different types of language to describe themselves. So some people with disabilities prefer to use person first language. So like in this picture, on the left-hand side of the page, you have somebody who prefers to describe themselves as a person with autism. And that is illustrated by the fact that they are holding a multicolored bag that is meant to represent their autism. Person first language is intended to fight stigma and emphasize that, I'm a human first, I am not my disability first. Other disabled people prefer to use identity first language. So an autistic person, a disabled person, as a couple of examples. So in this picture, that's illustrated by the person on the right, who has a multicolored head instead of, holding it outside of themselves. So identity first language is meant to indicate that having a disability is not a source of shame. And for some people, it is an important part of their identity. So like I said, our intent is always to honor people's individual preferences. And, in a situation like this, where we're addressing lots of people with lots of different preferences, we honor both by, kind of using both kinds of language, trying our best to switch back and forth as we talk. Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, so who we are and what we do. I often describe our office as a fantastic place to come when you're hitting some sort of barrier, to whether that's a barrier to your academics, whether that's a barrier to wellness. If we are not the office to help you, then we're a good place to start, because we can get you directed to the right office. So, a lot of folks find us because they are coming seeking an accommodation and need support with their disability. So we do a lot of work around advocacy, implementation, education, consultation with faculty members. And so that's one arm. And then, as I described when I was introducing Gabby, is supporting our students with finding and accessing resources. So that's why, if you're experiencing a barrier and you're like, I'm just not sure what is going on, but it's not working, come see us. And then we can either get you sorted, get you started, or we can get you to the right place. So that's who we are, what we do. We are located in Albany Stables. So if you are on campus, we are across from Miller Hall. We are on the academic side. We're also a shorter white building that's a covered stables. So we stick out. So if you're a family member of a student and you want to get to know us, swing by at NSO, because we will be here.
Okay. So our overview today of what we're going to be covering. So we are going to talk about the key differences between how accommodations are administered and dealt with in higher education versus K-12. I have a list of example academic and residential accommodations. I'm not actually going to spend time on it just because it is a very long list. And if I explained each and every single one of them, we would be here for 4 hours, and we don't want to do that. And really the process of setting up accommodations is super individualized anyway. But I have a couple slides with some examples. And as I believe Fran said, this webinar is going to be recorded, so you're always welcome to go back and, look at those slides. I am going to walk you through how to set up accommodations. So we're going to go to our OSA website, and I'm going to show you all the different places on the website that you can go to help you with the process of setting up your accommodations. And then Amy's going to talk about some academic resources on campus and some things that you can do this summer to prepare you to be set up for success for when you come to campus. And then after all of that, we're going to try to fit all of that wealth of information into about 40 minutes, and whatever time we have left, we'll devote to questions.
I just interject, Stephanie, really,
Yeah.
I would say, feel free as we're going through, if questions come up, throw them into the question box.
Yes,
Fran
please do.
managing that for us, and then that way you don't have to think, oh, what was that question I had? Just throw it in, and then we'll
Yeah.
start from the top when we get done.
Yes, exactly. Good. All right, so let's jump right in with the differences between K-12 and higher education. So the laws that apply to higher ed are different than those that apply to K-12. One area that we see this difference is in this concept of success versus access. So we must ensure that disabled people have access to all the same opportunities as people without disabilities on our campus. This is, of course, true in K-12 as well. And if you have a 504 plan, or if your child has a 504 plan, then you'll know about this. But in K-12, I would say the difference is in K-12, the drive is really about what accommodations are going to ensure that this student is successful in school. Whereas in higher ed, the drive is about what accommodations are going to ensure equal access to their education. So there's a difference there. In addition, one of the laws in K-12 that also applies is the IDEA, so the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And this law applies if you are a student who has or had an IEP, an individualized education program. And an IEP means that the school has the added responsibility of providing you with direct services, specialized instruction in your areas of need. And the IDEA, so IEPs do not apply at all to higher education. So that's a big difference too. The second major difference is the parent and staff versus student-driven approach. So in K-12, the school is entirely responsible for providing the accommodations and the direct services that your student needs. And parents are really meant to be very heavily involved in that process. So parents have to sign off on everything, agree to everything. If you as a parent do not agree with something in the school's plan for your child, then you have options for how to resolve that dispute. And of course, in K-12, it is encouraged to start involving the student in that process as early as possible, but it's not required that you do so until they turn about, I can never remember if it's 14 or 16, but until they're a little bit older, they're not legally required to be involved. However, once you as the student get to college, that script is flipped. So you, the student, are now entirely responsible for setting up your own accommodations. You are in charge, you get to make the decision at every step of the process. So that includes whether or not you decide to disclose to our office that you have a disability, whether or not you decide to request accommodations on the basis of that disability, whether or not you choose to share your approved accommodations with your professors, and whether or not you choose to arrange for certain accommodations to be utilized, such as requesting a peer note taker, scheduling an exam in our testing center, things like that. We can't even talk to your parents about you unless you sign a form that allows us to do so. So this is a really big change. It's a daunting change. We definitely recognize that. And I think that that's, part of why we wanted to do this webinar, so that we could sort of explain, how to get there, and also partly why our office is here, to help you navigate that big change and any road bumps that come up along the way. And then the last difference that I want to talk about is the fundamental alteration concept. So in K-12, in most cases, the accommodations that are written on your plan need to be applied, even if their use would significantly alter the goal of an assignment or a course. In college, we have this concept of the fundamental alteration, which means that if it is determined that the application of an accommodation would constitute a fundamental alteration to the learning objective of an assignment or a course, then it may not be reasonable to allow that accommodation in that situation. I will say that again, because it's a long, confusing sentence with a lot of big words. So if it is determined that the application of the accommodation would constitute a fundamental alteration to the learning objective of an assignment or a course, then it may not be reasonable to allow that accommodation in that situation. So I'll give you an example. A common accommodation is being allowed to demonstrate your learning in an alternate format. So let's say that the assignment is to do a presentation in front of the class, and one of the course's objectives is to learn how to do public speaking. So a student with, for example, social anxiety who really struggles to give presentations, you might have an accommodation that allows you to demonstrate knowledge in an alternate format than giving a presentation, but that accommodation could very well be determined to fundamentally alter that course's objective of learning how to do public speaking. So part of the interactive process that we do with students when you are setting up your accommodations with us is to, whenever there is an approved accommodation that might in some cases constitute a fundamental alteration, we make sure that we talk to you about that. And we really strongly encourage you to connect with your professors, talk to them about it, try to figure out if there is some sort of alternative. And we can help facilitate the conversation between you and the professor if needed. But just know that that is a pretty major change. And there may be times when there are accommodations that it's not feasible to allow you to use. If you want more information about some of the differences between K-12 and higher ed, this website down here, which is part of our OSA website, has a whole table of differences. So that's really helpful as well. Did I miss anything about that section, Amy? Okay. And then here are the example accommodations, which again, I'm not going to go through, but there's, just a list there. And if you want more information, more examples of various accommodations that we offer, again, another website that you can peruse. All right, so now we get into how to set up accommodations. So like I said, I am going to go to the Lewis and Clark website and walk you through basically this to-do list right here. But before I do that, I'm going to talk about documentation because we get a lot of questions about what is documentation supposed to look like? What needs to be on it? Who needs to write it? Where should it come from? And really our guidelines about documentation boil down to these couple of sentences right here. So it says documentation usually comes from a qualified licensed professional. So a doctor, a therapist, a neurologist, a gastroenterologist, could be a wide variety of providers. Could also be your 504 or your IEP documents from school. And states your diagnosis or your diagnoses, the impact of these on your ability to access your education, and recommendations for accommodations that that provider might have. It is best if this documentation is recent, so within the last 5 years. If it's not recent, then it's best if it indicates that it's a condition that is, long-lasting, lifelong, stable, those types of things. So some examples of that would be like dyslexia or celiac disease or something like that. And then I also want to make a quick note about residential accommodations. So there's a little bit of an exception to this, not really an exception to the guideline, but basically if you are seeking a residential accommodation, so housing, assistance animal, meal plan, those types of accommodations, instead of asking for like a letter that just has that information on it that I just talked about, we actually ask that your provider fills out a specific form that asks specific questions about what accommodations are they recommending and why. And that form can be found on our website. So if you know that you're going to be requesting some sort of residential accommodation, just email us and we can send you the link to those forms. Okay, so let's set up accommodations. So here's the Lewis and Clark website. To find, I'm going to make my window a little bit bigger. To find the Office of Student Accessibility homepage on here, you're just going to go up to the search bar and you can search for accommodations. You can search for Office of Student Accessibility. You can just search for OSA, probably easiest. And we're the first result that you get. So this is the OSA homepage. And going back to our to-do list here. So your first step is to gather relevant documentation, like we just talked about, and then you're going to fill out an intake form on our website and submit that documentation to us. So where you can find that information, I think the easiest way for me, this is the way that I usually find it, is to go to this first tab right here, at a glance, important information. Scroll down to intake form / submit documentation. And this is what our intake form looks like. So you're going to just go through and fill it out, put your information in there, put whatever you're willing to share about what your diagnoses are and how it impacts you, your history with using accommodations. There's a bunch of questions on here. I'm not going to go into detail. It's pretty straightforward, but you'll go through and fill that out. And then down at the bottom here, you're going to see a section for supporting documentation. And this is where you can upload whatever you've got to submit to us. So then do that, fill all that stuff out, hit submit, and that will come back to us automatically. And your first couple of steps are done. Your next step is to schedule a meeting to talk to us and go through the interactive process. And so again, the easiest way to find that is under this first tab, appointment scheduling in person and by Zoom. This is our scheduling website. You will see 4 different types of meetings that you can select. If you are a student who wants to set up, you've submitted your documentation and you're ready to set up your accommodations for the first time. So you haven't had accommodations before, you're going to select this accommodation intake type of meeting right here. If you are not quite ready to set up accommodations yet, you just have some questions or you want an informational meeting, or if you, let's say you've already set up your accommodations and it's like a few weeks into the school year and you have a question or a problem, or you want to add or change something about your accommodations, you can choose this general info or check-in meeting. Don't worry about choosing that staff or faculty if you're a student or a parent, because obviously, that's not going to apply to you, but and then if you need referrals for case management, like Amy mentioned, then you're going to choose this one. Please do not choose the general info or check-in meeting if you are wanting to set up your accommodations for the first time. The reason for that is that this only allows 30 minutes and the accommodation intake allows for an hour. We may not use the whole hour to set up your accommodations, but we just want to make sure that we have enough time to go through everything that we need to in order to get you set up for coming to campus. So let's say that you're a student who's ready to set up your accommodations for the first time. So you're going to choose that one. And then you're going to see the next page that has the people that you can make an appointment with. So let's say that you choose to make an appointment with me. This takes you to my availability page. Find my next, oh man, I'm busy. And when you find a time that, is open for me and that works for you, you can go ahead and select that. And then just fill this out, again, kind of the same thing as the intake form, but a little bit less information, and confirm your booking. I will say that it has been not uncommon for me to get bookings where the email address is like, your Lewis and Clark kind of code letters and numbers email address, and for somebody to put it at gmail.com. Please do not do that. Put it as at lclark.edu. The gmail.com, that's not a real email address. That's not your email address. If you put gmail.com, you will not get a confirmation email about your appointment, and it won't show up on your calendar because, again, your email address is at lclark.edu. So just make sure that you put that as the, whatever they call that, the domain name or whatever it is. So then you fill all that out, you confirm your booking, and then your appointment is booked. Next step. So then after you have had your appointment with us, and we have come up with a list of accommodations that we have agreed upon for you. I can't speak for everybody. I can't speak for Rebecca necessarily, but I always send a follow-up email after I meet with a student with all of the next steps that you need to do in order to put the accommodations that we've agreed upon in place. And so that email is going to state that you'll need to sign an accommodation agreement, send your accommodations letter, and then any of this other stuff that is also on there that applies to you. And so I'll show you how to do that, but just know that if you meet with me, you will get a follow-up email that also has all these links on there for the stuff that you need to do. So sign an accommodation agreement is the first one. So it's kind of confusing because I just said you're going to get a follow-up email from me with all the links, but the accommodation agreement comes from Dropbox. We use Dropbox Sign as our like online signing platform for our accommodation agreements. And so that is going to come as a separate email than the one that I sent that has all the links. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. I sent one to myself so that I could show you what this looks like. So it's going to look like it, like I am the person who's sending the email, but when you open it, it's going to have this like Dropbox Sign logo right there. And it's going to look like this. So you're going to hit review and sign. And this is what the accommodation agreement form looks like. So you'll make sure that your name is correct. Whoops, sorry, you're going to put in your student ID. You're going to review the approved accommodations and make sure that that looks accurate as to what we discussed. And then you're going to, oops, I already did this. You're going to click, put in your signature, easy peasy, click continue, and then I agree. And that is how you sign your accommodation agreement. Next, after that, and again, this is all going to be in the email that I send you, you're going to send your accommodations letter, which you need to send every semester. So this does not apply if you only have housing, meal plan, assistance animal accommodations. It does apply to you if you have any academic accommodations. So just know that. So for that, that is not under the at a glance, that's under undergraduate students and then approved accommodations, current students. This current students webpage is really kind of a hub for once you have been approved for your accommodations. It has a lot of information on there. It has a lot of the stuff that you might need to do as a student who has accommodations, a lot of links on there that are going to be really helpful for you. So I do always recommend that people bookmark this link. The send your letter tab is right here. It's just a Google form that you fill out. You can't do this step until you have registered for classes for your next term. So, and really you don't really have to do it like right when you register for classes. You can wait until like right before the semester starts or even like the first week of the semester. That's totally okay. But just know that you can do it as soon as you register for classes. So you're going to put in your information, agree to several statements, and then put in your class information. And that's why you can't do it until you register for classes. So you can see here that I put in some examples of just, let's say it was a Chem 100 class, section 2, things like that. So you're just putting in that information. If you want the letter to also go to your academic advisor, you're going to enter their name there and then just hit submit. What the letter is for is this is the step of the process where you are electing to inform your professors as to what your accommodations are. So your accommodations are not technically active for that semester until you have done that step. So don't forget to do that step every semester that you want to access your accommodations. It is important. And then if you have any other accommodations that require some extra work or, for you to do something extra on your part, such as a peer note taker, exam accommodations, accessible texts, or ergonomic furniture, you're also going to find links to request those things here. So our peer note taker form is another just Google form that you'll fill out. Exams, we have a whole website with a bunch of information about exams that I always recommend that people look over because, again, it's a lot of really good information, really important information. And then the exam request form to schedule to take it in our testing center is here. And then, yeah, these are both just Google forms as well to request those items. And then last step, and not necessarily legally required per se, but strongly encouraged by us always, is to meet with your professors at the beginning of the semester to discuss your accommodations. So go to their office hours, make an appointment with them, whatever works for you. But I think it's really important, especially when you are like first meeting your professors, and it might be that you're starting out on a major and so they're new to you now, but you'll get to know them over the course of your 4 years here, which is really nice. But make sure that you you communicate with them. I think communication is really one of the best pieces of advice that I can give to people. So meet with them, let them know, hey, here are my accommodations. Here's my learning style. This is how I learn best. Ask them about any accommodations, like how do you do accommodations in your class? Are there any of these that you foresee might be a problem at some point in the semester? It's really, really helpful to have those conversations now, or not now, but like at the beginning of the semester, because then you can avoid situations where it's the middle of the semester and everybody's super overwhelmed and you have a paper due in 2 days and you're hoping to, have this accommodation, but you didn't talk about it beforehand. So now it's sort of an urgent situation. So it's much better to try to do that stuff ahead of time. So that is how to set up accommodations. And I think Amy, you're next. Yeah, there you go.
I'm just going to put a kind of exclamation point on a couple of things that you said, Stephanie, and that is just really, put in your calendar to send your letter. I think sometimes students, they'll do it the first term and then there's like, oh, I've done it, right? And I think that's that kind of creating that change of mindset of student, I've alerted the school, right? But switching to that student driven. So we will not send your accommodation letter unless you tell us to do that. So put it in your calendar, do that at the beginning of every term. The other piece, you do not need, nor should you disclose your diagnoses to your professor. So when we're talking about having a conversation, it's really about the logistical workings. So if you have flexibility with attendance, flexibility with assignment deadlines as a part of your accommodation, you'll need to work out with your faculty. How would you like me to communicate that to you? How much in advance? What assignments can I have flexibility, and what will be a fundamental learning objective? So we're not asking you to discuss your health history. We're just saying it's in the action items, the logistical, how it looks. We also realize that developmentally might be much easier for a junior or senior standing student to do that than a first year student. So this is where you come and you talk to us. We can help you with those conversations. We can script it for you. We can help you craft emails. So know that you're not alone in that. But again, student driven, come and talk to us if you're feeling stuck with that. So I'm going to pivot to some academic resources. And whenever I get in front of students, I feel like I want to scream from the top of the mountain, the importance of using your academic resources. And these are available to any student. You do not need an accommodation to use these. They're free. And I'm going to highlight that the average GPA of students who access, so the first one, the SOB tutoring, is a 3.6. So SOB tutoring is our most commonly used academic resource. And it's what you have is you get 2 free hours of one-on-one peer tutoring for every one of your courses. And for the most part, this includes pretty much all of our first and second year courses. The difficulty comes in like the 3rd and 4th year, the more upper division classes, the students who would be skilled to teach those and tutor you on those will have since graduated. So we have some subject specific tutoring centers, but SOB tutoring is there. If you go through the College Advising Center, you can access SOB tutoring. If you're someone who's still working on that skill of time management, using SOB tutors as a way to structure your out of classroom study time is a really effective way. I also work with students who maybe, they're students, they're athletes, they're working jobs. So we're thinking about, okay, how do I best use the study time that I have, implement those SOB tutors. The Symbolic Quantitative and Resource Center, you'll hear it's called SQUIRC. That's a drop-in peer tutoring for math, stats, computer science, economics, biology, chemistry, and physics. I really like both the SQUIRC as well as the Writing Center, where they're peer drop-in. They tend to be drop-in hours late in the evenings, so in weekends. So really thinking about what the students schedule and when they would be able to need to use those. One of the most underused but most valuable resources we have on this campus is our WATSIC librarians. You can have one-on-one meetings with our librarians that will walk you through from beginning, like conceptualization, to the end of research papers, your projects. You're going to go through a presentation when you come for new student orientation with our librarians. It's one of my favorite presentations that's done during ASO. But they really are just get to know your librarians. They are a fantastic resource. The Interactive Learning Center is the hub for our world language classes. So this is staffed primarily by language assistants that are doing fellowships here at Lewis and Clark. They're native speakers from other countries who come and do a one-year fellowship. And so both drop in and scheduled appointments. And last but not least is our writing center. So Lewis and Clark, most of the students will do a ton of writing during their time here. And, they come to their first year having various experiences with writing. Some have come from high schools that did a ton of writing, some didn't. So utilizing getting to know the writing center, they will help you, again, sort of like the librarians, from conceptualization through all the different parts of your writing your papers. They will consult with you. It's a combination of peer tutors, consultations, and then you can do one-on-one with John Halsworth, who is one of our professors here, and he is who runs the writing center. So that's kind of an overview of our academic resources. Next slide. So I think it's helpful. I love that we're doing this webinar at the beginning of the summer, because I think there's some things that would be helpful to sort of bookmark, think about doing in preparation to ease that transition to coming to college. Obviously not all of these points are going to speak to everyone. But my hope is that you'll find a nugget of something in here that feels like, that was really important. Most important, and I'm going to stress this, so with big exclamation point, if you can get your accommodation set up this summer. So you'll have the next, 2 months, grab a time now. As soon as we're done, go ahead, grab a time. But let's get this stuff, because you have questions. We'll want to really work through the paperwork. There may be us asking for additional documentation. So that interactive process, it may be something we button up in an hour, or it may be something we need a little bit more time to finesse and talk through. So having that done in the summer, so that when you come to classes, you're already all set. You know exactly what you're going to do. Stephanie, myself, Rebecca will be back in August. You're feeling really good about how to get yourself sorted. So please do that this summer. Now, there's a very, very important deadline coming. We talked about housing accommodations, and I know it's part of your NSO checklist, but if you need a housing accommodation, we really need to see you in our office in the next week and a half, ideally by June 15th. Housing will be making the assignments towards the end of this month, and it's difficult for them. We can't guarantee a housing accommodation necessarily after all the assignments have been made. And I know, like, when Stephanie pulled it up, I kind of cringed. I'm like, oh shoot, there's no appointments available. But I'm telling you, if you need to get in for housing accommodations, email access at L. Clark. I'll get you in. Stephanie will get you in. We'll get you in. But we really need you to come see us and get everything processed in the next, week and a half. So that's an important deadline. The question about documentation, how long your last evaluation is, as we age, our brains change and our learning styles change. And so, the best thing is to be as knowledgeable about yourself and how you need to, the accommodations are going to be the most helpful for you. So if possible, if it's in your wheelhouse, if you can get reassessed, if it's been more than 3 years, I think that's really helpful. If you're thinking about going on to law school, grad schools, and you need to sit for bar exams, they do actually require some updated documentation. So, it's a good time if you can. And then, if it's not this summer, maybe it's sometime your first year that you're reevaluated. So growth mindset. So I'm a therapist by training. Mental health is my background, and I could talk about growth mindset for hours, but I'm going to try to just sort of keep it very short and brief. But working to embrace growth mindset, being a college student is hard. It's challenging. It's fantastic wealth of time to learn about yourself, try new things. It's not going to be a linear, it's going to be fits and starts. I often describe it as someone can be a really good driver and feel like, oh, I got this. And then you get behind the wheel of a stick shift and you're like, holy cow, I'm a brand new driver. And you're going, oh, what do I do? And suddenly, where's my blinkers, right? So if you can engage in that process and embrace it, expect the challenge, fail forward, right? Failure is not a bad F word. There's a couple of bad F words. I won't say them on this presentation, but failure is not one. Because if you think about times that you have failed, think about, what did you learn about yourself? What do I know differently? Like, if you can let go of shame and judgment and just think about what didn't work, get curious. I am so grateful for the times that I have failed, because that has what's catapulted me into new growth. If avoidance is a coping skill you use when you're overwhelmed, practice saying no to avoidance. And then embracing feedback. A lot of times students will come into my office pretty devastated because they get, they think, I worked so hard on this paper and this was like one of the best papers I wrote, and there's red ink all over it, or the professor really said, and I think, fantastic, great feedback. Oh my gosh, you don't want to have it all figured out your first year of college. Let's continue to get better as a writer. Let's continue to be challenged as a scholar. So embracing feedback and sort of taking feedback not as personal, like something is wrong with you, but like, I'm giving you feedback about this particular thing. And understanding that the skill of being a college student is a new one, right? So it's new, have grace, patience with yourself. So practicing your college readiness skills, key number one, time management, organizing your schedule. You will find that most faculty, student-facing offices will communicate via email to you. Very few folks actually text. So if you could get in the habit of reading your L. Clark email, responding to your L. Clark email, and figuring out ways to organize your email, that'll be really important. Self-advocacy. Some of the students that come through our office have had a lot of practice as being a self-advocate, and some are still like, oh, that's a muscle I'm still learning how to use. So if you, over the summer, challenge yourself to have hard conversations. Sometimes one of the difficult things of sitting and talking with professors is just kind of feeling comfortable to sit and hold that space. So practice having conversations with authorities, with individuals that feels very easy. If having a wellness plan, if in your wellness plan, having professional resources is a part of that. So that's counseling, med management, doctors, really important to get that all organized this summer. So what I often find the students who are like, oh, I really, I need to find a counselor, a therapist, a med provider in Portland. I'm going to get to class in September, and then at some point I'll figure it out. Well, they come, super exciting. September is kind of a blur because all the new stuff. And then suddenly it's October, and they're really like, I need to find somebody now. And as we know, very difficult to find somebody right now in mental health. So do your due diligence this summer. Look for the provider. If you need help, that's what I'm here for. Reach out to me. And then I'm just going to share quickly that academic feedback is shared differently here. So you may be used to having one portal that you can go to that tells you like, okay, this is my what's expected of me. These are my due dates. This is where I'm at academically in the course. This is where I'm sitting with my grade. Be aware that there isn't a single portal like that here. And professors use different LMS systems. So you may have a professor that one is using Moodle. Then you've got another professor that's using Google Classroom. And the third is going old school and handing you a paper syllabus, right? And one of them may give you some feedback every 3 weeks about how you're doing. One may fully expect you to track all of that's going on. So this summer, if you can develop a way to synthesize all your due dates, and that includes like housing due dates and, college outdoors due dates, synthesize all that to one system where you're really comfortable. Like, I'm going to grab the information from these other systems, but I'm going to put it into one concise system. So you're only having to track one system. It's really important. So helpful things to do this summer. So I think we have about 15 minutes. I don't know if there's any questions. I haven't looked at the question. Go Stephanie.
Oh yeah, I was going to say there's one that is asking what are accessible ebooks. And I think Also, Fran, at this point, if anybody's like, I don't know if we can see who's raising their hands, and who, if anybody wants to ask a live question, but just let us know if that's the case. But I'll answer the accessible book question. So accessible books, accessible texts, or like how we usually refer to them, we have kind of a shorthand, we call it AEM, or accessible educational materials. So most of us, when we think about a book, we think about like a physical, just like a physical book, right? But for various disability related reasons, or, it may not even be disability related, but some people prefer to use or need to use accessible versions of books. And so that could be Braille. It could be an ebook, which means that it's like kind of like a PDF of a book that has selectable text, if that makes sense. So I don't know if you have had experience with like reading a PDF on your computer where you can select the text versus a PDF where it's kind of blotchy and the computer doesn't recognize that the text is text. So an accessible PDF is one where the text is selectable. And so you can use your computer's read out loud function to have it read to you. And so those are some examples of what accessible texts are. Large print is another one. I'm probably missing some types, but yeah, that's basically what that is.
For one thing, Stephanie, that I think would be important for us to sort of reiterate to students is if a student is not sure about whether they want to continue, say they had a 504 IEP in high school and they're like, I'm just not really sure about whether I want to use those accommodations or not. What I would always stress is come to us, set your accommodations up. You don't have to use accommodations, but they cannot be retroactive. And
Yeah.
It's been a very common thing for students to come to my office and, they had say they had ability to test in a private testing space or exam extended time on their testing. And they didn't set that up before they came. They got through their first round of midterms and unfortunately didn't do as well because they didn't have enough time or they were really distracted. And they come back and say, here's my documentation. I really want to retake my midterms with my exam accommodations. And I say, I'm so glad you're here. I'm really glad you made the decision to take care of yourself as a learner. And we can only use your accommodations going forward. They cannot be retroactive. So better to have your accommodations in place and maybe you use them for some of your classes, not others. But it's really hard, I think, on students when they get halfway through the term and they realize, and then they come and they're like, I want to go back and I want to restart my term with my accommodation. There's nothing we can do about it. So,
yeah, good point. Other questions?
This isn't a question that was submitted, but I know that OSA does a lot of work outside of just accommodations, and maybe now would be a great time to mention some of the other things your office does for students who maybe don't have accommodations, but are, still looking for help or might receive an email from your office about note taking and other things like that.
Well, one thing that so Stephanie will host executive functioning study skills webinars, and that's open to any student.
I'll probably do, I sort of switch back and forth between in-person and webinars. And I think in the fall, probably I'll do in-person.
Yeah. And so that's a great way to just kind of learn from your peers as well as coming. So that's a wonderful resource that we offer. I do want to kind of stress the case management part of this piece. And so oftentimes, that's more in my wheelhouse. I do more of the case management pieces and Gabby does a lot of the does 100% of the case management. But really, if you're struggling to find providers, medical providers, mental health providers off campus in Portland, if you're trying to determine how to use your insurance card, if you're looking for resources for SNAP benefits, we can help with those pieces as well. So sort of the holistic care and keeping of yourself as a human here on campus is a lot of what we do. We also do some outreach. So, part of sometimes if students, if a faculty member is concerned about a student, then our office may outreach to the student if they're working with our office and invite them to come in. And again, I'm going to stress that piece at the beginning that Stephanie talked about student driven versus parent driven. Oftentimes, we're reaching out, but the student has to respond to say, I'm going to come talk to you, right? And one of the lovely things about doing a webinar, or even, you'll see our faces at NSO, is to kind of know who we are. And, no one's going to yell at you for not doing what you're supposed to do. Or, we're just really going to try to partner with you on identifying like, what's the right step to, what do you need going forward? But responding to the outreach when we do outreach is really important. Yeah. Any other questions? So housing deadlines, very, very important. And if, so if you still need to sort that out, just email us at access@lclark.edu and we will find a time to meet and get that sorted. So it's a pleasure. Welcome to Lewis and Clark. Come by the office and we look forward to seeing you in the fall.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks all. Have a good day, and you'll find this recording in a few days on our website.